"We must breed," the alien girl yelled furiously as the human escaped. While she slept, the searing twin suns of Proxima Centaur hammered brutally on Matthew's naked shoulders as he trekked through the changing crimson sands. His military's enormous emergency beacon had directed his escape pod to this desolate world. After his cargo ship was assaulted by pirates on the Outer Rim, the pod's navigation system identified signs of civilization near a small hamlet that may offer shelter, and sweat trickled down his strong torso, and he chastised himself for losing his shirt during the rocky landing. Black cargo pants, standard Alliance military issue from his days as a Marine, were already covered in fine crimson dust. At least he still had his combat boots, but the heat conducting through their soles reminded him of walking on fire. The settlement emerged as a mirage on the horizon, a cluster of dome-shaped structures that seemed to ripple in the heat waves. Matthew approached and discovered the buildings were made of some kind of shimmering material. It varied colors in the sunlight. The architecture was certainly alien, but it revealed traces of current technology. "If I'm going to die of heat stroke, might as well be somewhere interesting." He mumbled as he adjusted his path toward the nearest dome, which was just 50 meters away. Settlement's edge. When he first saw her, the woman came from one of the smaller domes in Matthew's steps. Her skin was a deep lavender tint that seemed to shimmer in the glaring sunlight. Her hair was long and straight. The color of twilight cascaded down her back, contrasting nicely with her form-fitting black attire that, little to the imagination. Their eyes locked across the distance, her dazzling yellow irises latching into his brown ones. Matthew felt a spark of electricity shoot through his body. She smiled, exposing lovely white teeth, and resumed walking, approaching him with a grace that seemed to defy the planet's gravity. "Welcome, wanderer," she said in exquisite English, her voice possessing a beautiful quality that made a spine shiver. "I am Tyler, and you seem like you could use some water and shade." Matthew found himself nodding, albeit something in the back of his mind shouted, "Come on." Her grin, friendly enough, yet there was something predatory in those yellow eyes that made his combat-trained senses squirm. "Mather clap mir," he responded, extending his hand. "And yes, water would be lovely right now." She grabbed his hand, and her skin cold despite the heat, she whispered, pulling him toward her dome. "Let me take care of you." The words sent shivers down his spine, but the promise of shade and water was too alluring to resist, so he followed. Matthew couldn't avoid the notion that he was headed into something far more difficult than a simple rescue. The interior of Tyler's dome was mercifully chilly and comfortable. The area was modestly furnished, but exquisite, with ambient lighting that appeared to come from the walls themselves. "Please sit." Tyler indicated to what appeared to be a lounging chair, and as Matthew sunk into it, she slid to a recessed alcove, returned with a crystalline jar of transparent liquid. "Our water is filtered." She poured him a glass of ancient mineral deposits, explaining that they have certain qualities that humans find fascinating. Matthew took the glass, his survival training screaming at him to be careful, but his dry throat won out, and he took a careful sip. The water was cool and delicious, with the effervescent quality that appeared to revitalize his fatigued muscles. He admitted finishing that Tyler sat across from him, crossing her long legs. "We don't get many guests here in the Rata village, especially not such impressive specimens." Her glance moved appreciatively over his naked chest, and Matthew felt his face warm, not from the desert heat. "My ship was attacked, and I need to contact the Alliance for extraction. Do you have a long-range communicator?" "Oh!" "We have something far better than that," Tyler purred as he leant forward. Matthew's pulse quickened, and warning bells rang in his head as she accentuated the last word of hospitality. But they seemed far more muffled, the river. Something about He attempted to stand, but the room. Tyler grinned and moved his seat. What was in the drink? Just minerals. Near him, and perhaps a few local herbs to help you relax Matthew's final. Before consciousness slipped away, he had a coherent idea that he should have listened to his intuition. He awakened up to the sweet sound of humming and fingers sliding over his hair. He was sleeping on something soft, head in Tyler's lap. "Welcome back, my strong one," she whispered. "I hope you're ready to begin our life together." Matthew sat up fast, his head whirling, and Tyler's eyes glittered. "You've been picked with an uncomfortable intensity. Our village needs new blood, and you're perfect for Matthew's military." Tyler's training kicked in as he analyzed his circumstances in a dimly lit chamber with bioluminescent panels. His vivid yellow eyes seemed to glow in the dim light, but his head was still fuzzy from whatever she poured in the water. His thoughts were clearing swiftly, and he said carefully, "I'm flattered. But no." Tyler's demeanor changed from seductive to concerned, indicating that he was not looking for a long-term commitment at the moment. "You don't understand, Matthew. The bonding process has already begun, and the minerals in the water have started to change. Your biochemistry will make you compatible with our species." "Compatible?" Matthew stepped away. "Nothing harmful," she purred, reaching for him, just getting ready for us. "Together, our children will be powerful and lovely, as you will see, Matthew." He rushed toward the door as his battle skills took over the dome's entrance, which whooshed open at his approach, and he broke out into the sweltering desert air. The twin suns had switched position, indicating him he'd been... Tyler's words echoed in surprise and rage behind him. "For at least a few hours, Matthew? Dare run from me, you insatiable pig? You can't escape what's already begun." Dashed between the domes, his bare feet scorching on the hot sand, he listened as the dome descended upon the mindless you people, had fallen many kilometers east, and while it wasn't space-worthy, had an emergency beacon in stock if he could get at a flash of movement. Other villagers emerged from their domes, all female, with very hues of purple skin, and caught his sight. Tyler, you're picked, has bright hair, and their emotions range from amusement to predatory interest. He's sprinting. Mate is attempting to escape. I can see. Mila Tyler's voice was closer than him. Expected help me catch him before he reaches the sandworms' territory. Sandworms. Matthew did not like the sound. Despite this, he couldn't afford to slow down. He pushed his muscles harder, grateful for years of military training. That had kept him in peak form. A high-pitched whistle pierced the air, and something whizzed past his head. Dart non-lethal weaponry, then they wanted him alive. "Stop shooting at him," Tyler commanded. "We need him undamaged for breeding." Matthew would have chuckled at the silliness of the scenario if, weren't fleeing for his freedom, the village was behind him now, and the huge desert stretched before of him. Sand shifted beneath his feet, making each stride a challenge with a low rumble. Vibrated through the ground, the sand approximately 5,050 meters ahead began to ripple. Bulging Matthew. "Stop!" Tyler's voice held genuine terror as you entered their hunting grounds. The sand erupted in front of him as something big blasted. Matthew skidded to a halt, his jaw falling at the sight of the creature. The creature resembled a huge earthworm combined with a shark, its segmented body covered in colorful multiple rows of teeth ringed its circular mouth, and sensing tentacles writhe around it. Matthew breathed, backpedaling, and the sandworm's heads bobbed back and forth, its tentacles sniffing the air. More rumbling signaled others were approaching. "Do not move," Tyler whispered. Abruptly beside him, "How did she catch up so quickly? They hunt by sense." Matthew stood very motionless as the gigantic beast gradually sunk down beneath the sand, leaving only a sadness to mark its presence. The rumbling lessened, but the danger was not done now. Tyler murmured softly, "Are you ready?" To get home and address this calmly, Matthew turned to face her, keeping his voice low. "I've known you for less than a day, and you drugged me. It was essential harm. She claimed that our species can only reproduce with genetically matched mates, and finding one is uncommon, until I observed." She stretched out to touch his chest, her fingertips chilly against his skin. "I knew. You were perfect, strong, healthy, and intelligent. Our children will be lovely children. Listen, where I come from, we normally date for a time." Tyler bent her head and asked, "Do you mean a courtship period? I don't have time for that. Our population is dwindling." And another rumble interrupted her, closer this time. As sand began shifting beneath their boots, Tyler grabbed his hand and pulled him sideways as a sandworm exploded. Where they'd been standing, its gigantic form arced over them, showering them with crimson sand. They rushed together, weaving amid erupting sandworms. Tyler's grip on his hand was unusually firm, and she appeared to know just where to walk to escape the monster's vibration. But she yelled out, "They're following our footsteps!" Matthew noticed a shimming distortion in the air front of him, marking the edge of some supernatural action. They dove through the barrier just as another worm lunged for them, and the creature recoiled from the sonic field, screeching and disappearing beneath the sand. Matthew laid on his back, breathing heavily and intensely aware of Tyler pressing against his side. Despite everything, Tyler agreed that the electric rush that went through him at her touch was strong. Propping herself up on one elbow to look at him, sand sprinkled her purple skin, making it sparkle even more. "Impressive than I expected. Most men would have worried." "I'm not most men, no," she smiled. "You're not. Which is exactly why you're great for us," her expression becoming serious. "Matthew, I know this appears strange to you, but please allow me to explain everything. If you still want to leave after that, I will not stop you." Matthew gazed at her, considering the adrenaline was dissipating, along with some of his panic. She had just saved his life after all, and there was something in her eyes, perhaps desperation or loneliness. Right," he replied finally, "but no more drugged water." Tyler laughed musically, sound that made his heart skip deal, but it should alert you that our ordinary water still includes those minerals. Matthew grumbled, but he was smiling despite himself. "Lead the way, but keep your hands." I can envision them back in Tyler's dome, Matthew sitting across from her clutching a glass of regular water, or what she claimed to be regular water. His body felt different, somehow more connected to the surroundings. The desert heat no longer seemed as oppressive, and Tyler's, "Our story began 3 generations ago, Tyler, and it sparked something primal inside him that he battled to suppress." Her yellow eyes began to radiate the bioluminescent light. "We were once vibrant civilization of millions scattered across this entire continent. Our society was enriched by advanced technology, but then the Great Plague arrived." Tyler's hand trembled slightly, but not from fear. With every movement, seemed to grab his attention like a moth to flame, and he pushed himself to focus on the virus was targeted by her words rather than the way her lips moved while speaking. Within a year, we had lost 99% of our guys. Population, those who survived were sterile. Our experts labored tirelessly to find a solution, but by then it was too late, which is why there are only women in the village. Matthew realized, his voice hoarse. He cleared his throat, but how have you survived this long? Tyler's expression softened. Discovered that certain species were compatible with ours, humans being the most suitable for the minerals in our water. Modify their genetic structure just enough to allow effective breeding, while keeping the strongest features. Matthew sat down with his drink, and suddenly understood the water. Drank earlier, and even this water now, Tyler went closer to her fragrance. Intoxicating, your DNA is already adapted. Can't you feel it? The heightened awareness. Matthew held out his palm, indicating his sensitivity to pheromones and his desire to stop, though everything in him wanted to reach for her. This isn't right. You can't just change someone's genetics, structure, without their consent. Would you have consented if I asked, Tyler? Challenged. Would you have believed me? Sometimes need necessitates actions that outsiders may find this unusual, but Matthew stood up and paced the room. Skin felt electric, and every nerve ending was alive with feeling. How many others? Many human males have you brought here. None survived the voyage through the desert. Tyler stated quietly that you are the first to reach it to our community in almost a decade. The sandworms normally assure that. But you are different, stronger, more resilient, and now that I'm here, you expect me to simply accept your breeding stallion? Matthew's voice raised with fury, while part of him relished the thought, not just mine, Tyler. Stood gliding toward him with feline grace. Our village needs genetic diversity. Multiple partnerships would... Matthew moved backward, his heart beating. This is absurd. I'm not some prize. Tyler agreed that you are much more than that. You are our future, the destiny of my entire species. She reached out, stroking his chest. And deep down, you want this too. The minerals do not produce attraction, Matthew. They only accentuate what is already there. He gripped her wrist with the intention of pushing her away, but instead felt himself tugging her closer with the touch of her chilly flesh against his smell, waves of pleasure through his body. Damn it, he hissed, battling for control. This isn't fair. Tyler seldom whispers, but occasionally unfair circumstances can lead to lovely ends, she pressed. Matthew, we are not monsters. We are a dying race battling for survival. Her body fits wonderfully against his. So, you could be our salvation. A tap on the dome's entrance chattered the Nera and Tai Steepak, screaming out, "Enter!" An older woman with silver-streak purple hair entered, carrying what appeared to be medical equipment, and her yellow eyes brightened as she saw Matthew Elder. Nera Tyler bowed slightly. This is Matthew, and I notice Matthew approached. Studying Matthew with scientific interest, the genetic markers in his blood sample are astounding. Matthew scowled. When indeed, well, you were, unaware. Tyler acknowledged typical technique. Of course it is, Matthew, mumbled Nera, triggered a yaw display that revealed complicated DNA sequences. See, here she pointed to a swirling pattern. The mineral fusion is nearly finished. His genetic structure is already 60% compatible with ours. Permanent? Matthew inquired, both dreading and anticipating the answers to the adjustments. Yes, Nida nodded, but they're not hazardous, just the opposite, in fact. Yourself stronger, faster, and more resilient. Your longevity will most likely double or treble, and your offspring should... Matthew sat down on a neighboring chair with a smirk on his face. Tyler knelt beside him, absorbing it all in. His hand. But time isn't on our side. The village's population is decreasing each year. Without new genetic material, we face extinction within 2 generations, and if I agreed to help Matthew look between them, what exactly would it mean you would be given status as a progenitor? Indicated that all of your needs would be addressed, and you would have freedom within the village to choose breeding partners. Tyler tightened his grip on my hand. If I refused, your children would be raised as nobles from among the eligible ladies. Matthew, the changes are now taking place. Your body is responding to our environment and biology, and we will soon be human. Females will no longer be compatible with you, and you will need us as much as we need you. Matthew arose abruptly, fleeing. Tyler nodded and ran his hands through his hair. But I needed time to ponder. Please do not attempt to escape again. The desert is even more deadly at night. As if to reinforce her argument, a distant roar resonated across the sands. Far huge than a sandworm, great Matthew groaned. What was that something you don't desire to meet? Nera remarked coldly. Rest tonight and we'll talk about the details tomorrow. Your new life here, she turned to depart, but halted and Matthew welcomed to the... After she departed, Matthew turned to Tyler. You planned this from the moment you saw me, didn't you? She admitted. Without shame, but not simply for my people's survival, she drew closer again, her body radiating tempting. From the moment I saw you, I knew you were destined to be mine, Matthew. Felt his resistance dissolving, changes in his body, the heat of the desert, Tyler's enticing presence. Everything was becoming too much to fight, and... If I stay, he muttered. If I agree to... Tyler's smile was both seductive and triumphant, which I'll show. The next morning, Matthew awoke to see that his body had undergone even more alterations. His skin took on a slight iridescent look in the light. His senses were sharper than ever. He could hear discussions from surrounding domes and smell the complex. The Council of Elders had met to hear a third 12 women with silver streak hair sat in a semicircle with the elder Nera. Tyler stood with Matthew in the center. Her presence was both reassuring and... Before I agreed to anything, Matthew addressed the council, his voice firm, despite the anxiety in the room. A murmur ran through the assembled elders. Nera. Leaning closer, her yellow eyes were keen. I desire freedom of movement. No more drugged water, no restrictions. I stay because I consented to Nera. Nodded. Albeit, we must urge you remain behind the villages. Protective borders. Second, Matthew said, I want access to your medical facilities and search data. If I'm going to be a part of this, I want to understand exactly what's happening to my body. That sounds acceptable. Another elder spoke up, especially considering what we observed in Oswinzi. While I was sleeping, Matthew turned to Tyler for more samples from his most recent blood testing. Shrugged unapologetically, you're a heavy sleeper about those samples, Nera. Activated a holographic display in the center of the room. Matthew, your genetic adaptation isn't only going quicker than imagined, it's evolved in ways we've never seen before. And the display exhibited of Requipyramisa's complicated molecular structure meant little to Matthew, but had the elders leaning forward in excitement. It's not simply accepting and explaining the changes, it's also improving them. The immune system incorporates our hereditary resistance to the plague while retaining its human adaptability in principle, any male offspring you have would be naturally immune rather than only immune to another elder. explaining that they would carry the cure within their genetic code, and each generation would strengthen the resistance until the plague becomes powerless. Tyla, finish her hand, finding Matthew's. You're not only Matthew, you are the key to our species' survival. Matthew accepted this. Information feels the weight of duty lay on his shoulders, which leads me to my third condition. As a parent, I want to be involved in my children's lives, not only as a genetic provider. Muttering among the elders traditionally, males have not been involved in kid-wearing, one complained. Well, tradition hasn't worked out so well for your species, has it? Matthew countered, perhaps it's time for some changes. Nera studied him seriously. What else? I wish to express in choosing my... Matthew felt Tyla tense alongside him, and while I understand the need for multiple matches, I want Tyla to be my... Tyla's grasp on his hand tightened, her expressing joy. Throughout their blossoming bond, he said, I want to help better those sonic barriers hardly keep out the sandworms, and I heard something considerably bigger last night. If I'm going to help rebuild your people and make sure they have a safe future, the elders quietly conferred. Before Nero spoke again, your military history could be useful there. We agree these conditions, she paused. However, we have one of our own, Matthew, and said time is crucial for us. We need you to start contributing to our population right away. Various partners, chosen for optimal genetic variety. Matthew felt heat rise in his face. We were chatting about 5 people at first, including Tyla Naira, and her expression was strictly clinical. We'll need to evaluate the success rate before evaluating whether more are needed. 5. Matthew choked entirely. Tolerable as an option. Matthew choked entirely. Tolerable. Tyler interrupted smoothly. Tolerable. Elders nodded in agreement as Matthew strained to grasp what he was committing to. There's more. Nera triggered another. The holographic depiction of your genetic structure shows that you could have up to 50 healthy offspring prior to adaptation. We need as many as possible to ensure the cure spreads through the population. 50. Matthew sat heavily in a seat, and then a smile appeared on his face. Wait till I reached your age, he sighed. Elders nodded in agreement. As Matthew sat down and a gaper spread through the population, 50. And why should we start immediately? The candidates have already been chosen. Matthew raised his hand. One more condition. We do this at my own pace, with no pressure, schedules, or breeding. Program let things happen organically. The elders exchanged looks before Nera nodded agreed, albeit we hope you realize the severity of our predicament. Oh, I understand. Matthew looked at Tyler, who was nearly smiling with delight. Believe me, I don't think pace will be an issue, as if to underscore his increased senses picked up the pheromones being emitted by every girl in the room, his new biology. Reacted immediately, making him fidget uneasily in his seat. Then we are in agreement, Nera said. Matthew, you are. Hereby conferred the title of first progenitor with all rights and obligations thereof. She smiled. Welcome to your new life. The afternoon sun casts long shadows through the village's communal garden. The dome, where Matthew met his potential companions, was surrounded with exotic flowering plants that released delicate presence that promised a daily demonstration of Anarbal's strength. He grinned and shut his eyes tightly shut to release the fragrances tingling his augmented senses. Her fingers tingling with his heart. How could I forget? Matthew grinned, but his heart sank, made stiff from Matthew's grin. But her heart, you remind me every 5 minutes. Eldonirad led 5 women into the garden, each with a distinct appearance, but sharing the distinguishing purple skin and golden eyes of their breed, they moved with fluid grace. Nera, the first progenitor, began formally wearing traditional robes. May I present your picked candidates? A tall, athletic woman with short, spiky hair stepped forward. "I am Rava, Chief of Security." Her muscles flexed as she bowed slightly. "My genetic line carries features for improved strength and reflexes." Matthew nodded, impressed by her confident bearing. Reminded him of his marine fighting instructors. Then arrived a willowy damsel with intricate braids. "I am Mila, lad." Her speech was sweet but precise. "My lineage specializes in intelligence and problem-solving talents." The third candidate had an ethereal feel to her. "Senna is the artistic director, and her movements are almost dance-like. My family line is known for originality and emotional intelligence," Kira, chief engineer, announced. A robust woman with practical, close-cropped hair. "My genetics bring great spatial awareness and technical aptitude." The ultimate applicant was shorter than the rest, but moved with glitter in her eyes. "My line produces the best trackers and survivors. The hormones each woman was unintentionally producing, his new biology responded passionately, causing him glad for the loose-fitting robes he'd been handed." "Ladies," he managed, his voice rougher than intended, "I'm honored. However, this is unique for my species, as we usually form monogamous connections. Yet your human past is rich of tales of powerful men having several spouses. Miles saw your genetic scene." Matthew disputed that those were cultural practices rather than biological ones. "Tara challenged you to get closer, and your body plainly approves of the arrangement." Tyler growled faintly beside him, and Matthew clasped her hand reassuringly, maybe to demonstrate compatibility. Rava suggested stretching in a way that highlighted her athletic form. Demonstrations. Tyler snapped. Not yet. The initial progenitor specified that things would move at his pace. Nirida reminded them, but time spent together in non-intimate circumstances would be useful for creating comfort and trust. Matthew agreed swiftly. "Thank you for the intervention. Perhaps we could stop with a talk about something I'd like to learn more about." "Aside from your genetic contributions, the women appear shocked yet delighted with the suggestion. They positioned themselves on soft cushions SC, dispersed over the garden forming a loose circle. "Tell us." Senna urged that her creative curiosity reveal what makes humans so adaptable. Matthew considered this as he sat between Tyla and Mila. "We are survivors throughout our history, faced innumerable challenges, natural disasters, wars, epidemics of our own. We are survivors throughout our history." Tara learned that our environment has extraordinary genetic adaptations. Forward, her hunter's instinct stating greater every day, vibrating much more intensely. Matthew nodded, intensely aware of everything. Scent, sound, and movement in the garden are all more strong, and I can hear heartbeats, smell emotions, and feel the energy moving through the plants. Milo took notes on a holographic pad about mineral integration. "Your cerebral pathways must be effective because they are affecting more than that." Ra grinned, clearly pigging out. Tyler gave her a warning look, but Matthew's laughter broke the atmosphere. "Ladies, I admire your excitement, but it is still a lot. I need time to adjust to these changes before creating further issues." Senna smiled, understanding that we have waited generations for a compatible companion. We can be patient. Tara mumbled, eliciting chuckles from the others as the conversation continued. Matthew discovered oneself relaxing. Each woman was accomplished, intelligent, and interesting in her own right. Their society had adapted to the absence of males by becoming more specialized and efficient, with females taking on everything. "You've constructed something spectacular here," he admitted, "despite responsibilities generally occupied by men in human cultures. Everything you've lost, you've survived and prospered, but we're facing extinction without new genetic material." Milo reminded him that your arrival isn't just about reproduction, but also about evolution, where our species merge to produce Matthew. And he added that if the subsequent offspring inherit my immunity to the plague, they could aid, re-establish the male population, naturally, exactly, Naira approved. That is why selecting different mates is vital, as each union will produce unique genetic, Matthew felt. Tyler tensed beside him and realized something you're worried about. So he mumbled to her that, with more alternatives, I'll forget who found me first. She met his gaze, vulnerability shining through her normal assurance. He interrupted her with a kiss that made the other woman move restlessly. "You rescued my life in the desert and showed me this wonderful world. Whatever happens to the others, Tyler, Tyler's possessive joy was almost tangible, and you're my primary partner at all times." Tirara stood, stretching languorously. "As fascinating as this is, I have hunting chores to attend to. First, progenitor, when you're ready to explore your new talents, I'd want to take you tracking in the safe zones." Other women followed suit, each sending invites to varied activities, including fighting training with Rava Laboratory, work with Mila on artistic projects with Senna, and engineering tutorial with Kira. As they went, Matthew knew they were giving him space while providing future opportunities for connection. It was rather delicate manner from a species that had earlier been so forthright about their desires, their Elohim. "You set the pace," Naira agreed, seeing his expression, "but I suspect their patience won't last." Matthew grumbled, yet smiled at the training arena. Resonated with the sound of combat as Matthew sparred with Rava. His improved strength and reflexes forced a formidable opponent, but the security chief's lifetime of experience kept him on his toes. "Your adaptations are raw," exclaimed, as he dodged a quick combination of attacks, indicating remarkable progress. "Your speed has doubled since yesterday." Matthew grinned and enjoyed the challenge. "The Marine Corps taught me to adapt rapidly." Their dance of combat was disrupted by Terra's entrance, and the Hunt Master's expression was urgent. "First, progenitor. We've spotted odd movement patterns in the desert, and I need—" Before Matthew could react, Tyla came into the stadium, her face gleaming. "Excited, Matthew, I have news for you." She stopped, taking in the spectacle before her. Matthew and Rava are in close combat stance, sweating and breathing fiercely. While Tyra watched with predatory attention, Tyla highlighted vital news. Her eyes narrowing, Matthew knew that the tone training session was done, and notified Rava, who nodded in understanding. "Tracking can wait an hour," Tara conceded, though her demeanor suggested differently when alone with Tyler. Matthew saw the mix of delight and anxiety in her eyes. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." She took his hands and placed them on her abdomen. "Everything is just correct." Matthew's keen senses spotted minor alterations in her quickly. Biology, a new energy signature surging beneath his palms, his eyes dilated. "You are pregnant!" Kyler had triplets, all males according to the medical scan, the first male children in our community in more than Matthew sat down on a neighboring bench, astonished. "That is great, but how can you know they're guys so quickly as our pregnancies progress?" Tyler, sitting alongside him, explained that unlike humans, the genetic markers are visible from the first day. Of your special DNA, they're developing faster than normal. "How much faster will they be born?" 3 months. 3 months. Matthew ran a hand through his hair as an alarm went off. Through the village, cutting him off, Tara raced back into the ring. "We have to go immediately," she insisted. Heading into the village, Matthew stared at Tyler, conflicted between his new responsibilities as a father, and Tyler pushed him gently to protect our home. Protect our children's future. Minutes later, Matthew found himself running across the desert with Tara and Rava. His improved vision cut through the heat waves, and his new senses detected vibrations through the desert, which is larger than any sandworm we've encountered. And it's not alone, Ra explained. "Look closely at the movement pattern. These are coordinated attacks, Matthews." A military train arrived, and they were testing the sonic barriers for weak areas when a gigantic beast burst out. Sand ahead of them was easily 3 times the size of a normal sandworm, with plated scales that shined like polished obsidian, and several rows of sensing tentacles were wed around its head. Tara breathed a matriarch as the queen of the sandworm colony. Roba stated as she prepared her weapons, "We assumed they were extinct." The matriarch's tentacles lashed. Through the air, tasting their senses, Matthew felt a primitive intelligence probe his thoughts, inquiring about me. "Realized my aroma is different. You're changing DNA," Tara stated. "You're neither wholly human nor fully like us." The creature's huge head moved closer. Matthew held his ground, extending out with his increased senses. The link was basic but clear. The matriarch recognized him as something. "New item that might harm her domain. We need to establish borders," Matthew softly showed her. "We are not a threat to her colony, but we will defend our land." "How do you," Ra said skeptically, "propose we do that?" Matthew came up and let his changed pheromones transmit his intent. The matriarch's tentacles rubbed against his flesh, sending electrifying tingles through her body. "I am the guardian here," he projected the thought, not sure if it would succeed. "This land is claimed. There is place for both our peoples." The matriarch's statement thundered in his head, images of hunting grounds, breeding cycles, and territorial limits she was willing to negotiate. Matthew, who is bright, told his comrades that she is realistic and that the colony requires space to flourish, doesn't want conflict. "Then let's define terms." Tara moved forward with her hunters, instincts serving her well. "We may mark safe zones for hunting territory." Negotiation was unlike anything in Matthew's military experience. A sophisticated ballet of hormones, mental images, and primal understanding. After it was done, both sides had cleared territory and hunting rights as they watched. Roba slapped Matthew's shoulder, demonstrating excellent diplomacy as the first progenitor. Tarara purred as she moved closer. "Your powers continue to astound." Matthew stepped back, recalling Tyler's news. "We should return, and I'm going to be a parent." Both women froze, already Tara's. Triplet's eyes widened, and Matthew couldn't help but smile. All guys, understanding the implications, hit them quickly. The first male children, worrying about his unique genetic structure, would change everything. "Council will want to speed the breeding program," Robin stated, "especially because we know your adjustments are so." Matthew held up his hands, allowing me to process becoming a father before we discussed it. "Creating more babies." Tara chuckled, a predatory sound. "Oh, first progenitor, we don't have the luxury of time. And our species' survival depends on your production." Matthew sighed. Clearly, his life had gotten extremely confusing, but he couldn't ignore the excitement swelling in his chest. Going to be a father, guardian, and even the savior of a whole species. 3 months pass in a frenzy of preparation, celebration, and change. The town has transformed from a sleepy outpost to a lively community, ready for its first male birth in over a decade. Matthew found himself in the center of it, with his days filled with tasks both expected and aired. The medical dome hummed with activity as Tyler went into labor, and Matthew paced outside his improved senses, soaking up every sound and emotion. From within, the other potential mates waited with him for every offering. Rava promised him that her warrior's confidence was steadfast and that their children will be strong in their own unique ways. Brilliant Mila said that analyzing the most recent genetic scans on her holographic display, the combination of features is remarkable. Terrara came from a hunting expedition with unusual fruits recognized for their nutritious value. Senna had adorned the homes for the new mother, which she expressed with unusual gentleness. Nursery, with artwork showing both Earth and their desert world, while Kira devised innovative cribs fitted for all. Their acceptance of their status as extended family members rather than immediate mates had startled them. Contact Matthew Elder Naira emerged from the medical dome, her face glowing at first. Matthew rushed inside to find Tyler cuddling 3 small bundles, seized his breath at the sight of the infants having human coloring but with a slight iridescent teeth. Their dark hair exhibited streaks of purple, and as they opened their eyes, they were stunning. Amber is a wonderful blend of human brown and extraterrestrial yellow. He whispered, gathering his family in his arms. The medical officer reported strong life signs and preliminary scans, proven they contain both the immunity to the illness and the potential to pass it on our sons. Tyler projected the future of democracy. Both of our species' infants were named according to both human and Italian traditions. Alexander signifying protector. Phoenix represents rebirth and Leo represents power. Their hybrid nature was readily obvious in fast development, another gift of their unique genetics. Once word went around the hamlet, celebrations began. The people gathered in the central dome, and Elder Nera made a news that will transform everything. The success of these newborns proves what we wanted, she said. Humanity's adaptation and resilience have resulted in something larger than either species alone. Kauniel has chosen to increase our outreach. We shall seek other compatible individuals with the first progenitor, Matthew. Overseeing their integration, Matthew walked forward with his sons in his arms and Tyler by his side. Accept this duty, but with conditions. Each human that arrives must freely select and completely grasp what little you do. And if there will be no more trickery or drugged water. Nera nodded. Your manner has proven to be more successful than our conventional methods of celebrating. Continued into the night, Matthew watched as his children were handed around, and his children were made away with his children, just with their prospects. Mates, but the entire village. The sight of so many caring hands willing to help raise his sons filled him with joy later. In their private dome, Tyler nestled against him while their sons slept close. "Do you regret it?" she questioned softly. Matthew reminisced about his old. He reflected about his new life as the lonely cargo ran through the nothingness of space. He reflected on the hardships, obligations, and unexpected joy of parenting. About the future, watching his sons develop, helping establish a civilization that bridges distances. "Not for a moment," he replied. "Honestly, I could have done without you following me across the desert and calling me a lusty pig," Tyler laughed, waking before the sun was high above the horizon. And Matthew raised his youngest son and marveled at how his small fingers already displayed characteristics of both species. Tyler said, with a familiar glitter in her eye, "Now that we should start working on the next batch. The village needs more children, and I want girls as well." Matthew moaned playfully immediately. "I thought we agreed to take things at my pace. Oh, please," she sneered, running her fingertips along his chest. "Your pace has you training with Roba every morning and hunting with Tara every afternoon." He spent strange amounts of time in Mila's lab out of genuine professional interest, protested though his body's reaction to her touch revealed differently, of course. Tyler, just like Senna's private painting classes and Kira's daughters, Matthew. Laughed, submitting to the inevitable. His life had become a difficult balance of obligations, relationships, and cultural status. Bridges, but he wouldn't have it any other way. He was no longer just Matthew Clapmere, a former Marine cargo pilot. He was first progenitor, father, mate, and protector of the link. Word! Between two species and the key to their merged future. As Tyler led him towards with to the absurdity of his crash landing in this barren planet seemed like calamity, but it had led him to something extraordinary. A new family, a new purpose, and a love that transcends species. "Are coming, my strong one." Tyler called teasingly. "Hey, always," he responded, following her into their future.